All right, what's up, everybody? I am Trevor here again with a new face. His name is Jake Marconi. He is the head coach of HWPO Strong. He is a old arch nemesis from the Northeast region as we competed against each other. And actually, one of the fun things in CrossFit and fitness is we did train together despite being on the competition floor working against each other. Today, we're going to chat a little bit about coaching, programming, because usually when you get pretty good at something, it helps to transfer that knowledge to others out there who also want to get good at this thing we spent a ton of time focusing and training at. And we're going to start with just this general idea of this continuum that we've gone from a blog style programming, which, if anyone doesn't know, CrossFit.com started as a blog style programming, a workout of the day that was anyone could follow and write their results in the comments. And then there was this transition to a more individual style of programming, which I think is where me and Jake got involved in. We had coaches, they were mostly local coaches, and then they kind of became remote coaches. And now where we are today, there are slightly less remote coaches, but way more opportunities in, we'll call it the blog or the mass following type programs. Jake, what are your thoughts on this transition? We went from individual programming to a blog style programming.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, Trev, thanks for having me. And for those who were wondering, Trevor and I would trade blows on workouts because we were nemesises. Uh, if there was a barbell in it, Trevor was winning, unless it was maybe under 115 pounds, I had a chance. And if there were burpees in a workout, I was doing my best to hold my own. So we had a lot of fun training together. And like he mentioned, we both were with individual coaches at the time, and then we'd get together for some sessions. But I think before we move into talking about specifically our opinions on all these things, we should define first what a blog or an individual program
Mhm,
is.
mhm.
So when we say individual, we're talking about Trevor and I both went to a person who programmed and said, "Hey, we would like you to write a program that is specific for me and my needs." And I have this goal for both of us. It was getting to regionals and doing as well in CrossFit as we possibly could. And so that program was designed for that goal, considering both Trevor and I's specific needs. And specific needs go all the way from what our weaknesses are physically in the gym to what our schedule looks like. Because I was in school at the time, Trevor was coaching at the gym, right? All of those things are considered when you are writing an individual program. So if you're working with an individual coach, they should be aware of your schedule, of the things that steal time or that take time out of your day or your week or your commitments. And part of that individualization is building around your life, right? That is why it is valuable to have an individual program. People, I think, started to come to realize that they maybe didn't have needs specific enough to have an individual coach that they were paying a large sum of money to each month, right? And with a little bit of education in their own digging, and now that's exploded because you have ChatGPT, which can actually think and reason with you, which I'll touch on in a second. They realized that with a little bit of their own knowledge and digging, they could adjust that program largely for themselves. And I think that there was this idea for a long time, which I have bought into, and I think in specific cases is still really valuable, that an individual coach is going to get you the best results possible. And all things equal, that's probably true, right? If you have a group program, somebody on a program that is written for a mass of individuals, right, without necessarily being any specific one group of individuals, other than that they want to do, say, CrossFit competitively, versus you following your individual program that is written for you. If everything else is equal, your buy-in, your nutrition, your sleep, right, your skill level, one to one on each side, the individual program will typically win out. Things often aren't equal, and there are things that are missing inside of that individual program, like other people to train with, other people to maybe compare your times with, just a general community of folks that you're getting to experience this thing that you're doing with. And group program provides a lot of that. So when we say blog program, a blog program started as CrossFit.com was a blog. You would log on every day and there'd be a workout of the day. You could just, everybody saw the same workout, everybody did the same workout, and then everyone put their scores in. And that is kind of what made CrossFit explode. People loved it. They were able to say, "Oh, Trevor from New Jersey did 4 minutes and 59 seconds on this workout, and Jake from Connecticut did 4 minutes in 57 seconds. Yes, I beat you by 2 seconds. There was burpees in the workout." And you were able to look around and see these people, right? There might not have been a ton of education at the time, but if we're talking specifically CrossFit, they had the journal, right? And so the journal was kind of their educational piece. Now, the blog has progressed through many iterations. You had other people that were really popular in the blog sphere, which is like Invictus had a competitive blog that for a long time was free. You could just go on and follow the
Hmm.
blog. And it had that same vibe, but it was written for a group of individuals with a specific need. That group was people who were interested in being competitive in the sport of CrossFit, and they were chasing kind of that regionals level or semifinals or sanctionals, depending on when you got into the sport. So that program was more specific, say, than the CrossFit general blog.
Yeah,
And
this
we saw kind of a
GPP
new,
blog, right?
yeah, a
Yeah.
GPP, right? A general physical preparedness. If you guys don't know what that acronym is, just means that you want to be generally fit and ready for what life throws at you. That Invictus blog became more specific. And now, years and years later, we've evolved into programs like HWPO, Proven, Mayhem, Misfit, Sentinel, any number of these CrossFit training programs uh, are a derivative of that blog, right? It is a group program and those programs are written for a specific goal, right? And so for some kind of subset of individual. And if you follow that program, you're generally falling into the category of whatever it is, right? So I write the strong program, which is bench, squat, deadlift, and that is the focus of my program. And if you are following it, I'm assuming that you are somebody who wants to PR those lifts and train in that way. And so I'm writing for an avatar, right, which is a generalized individual with this goal of improving their bench squat deadlift, but I'm making decisions that generally work for most people, which means
Hmm.
that they will not work for some people and some specific cases. And that is true on every blog program, right? You cannot write a program that 1,000 people or 10,000 people or 500 people or 10 people are going to follow that is going to work for every individual exactly the same. You can generally get them in the right direction. Now, I mentioned earlier ChatGPT has helped a lot with this, right? And AI in general, which is kind of what we're dealing with here with work, is that those tools, AI tools, allow you to make better decisions about your training without having to have the breadth of knowledge that someone like myself or Trevor has. Because that's what's happening when we're coaching an individual. We're saying, oh man, based on all of this stuff that I know concretely from textbooks or wherever, and all of this experience that I have, this is the decision that I'm going to make for that person. There's still a lot of value in people like that and having an individual coach. But if you have a tool like WurQ, which we're going to get into more in depth in this conversation, and you have a tool like ChatGPT, or you just have a tool like ChatGPT, what can happen is you can reason with it. And like I personally will go into ChatGPT and be like, hey, this is the deadlift cycle that I'm running. These are the considerations. Like, I don't really feel like going through every set and rep of this particular accessory progression. Like, here are all my parameters. Like, what do you think would maybe be the best practice? You can even prompt it to be like, what would Louis Simmons do? What would Matt Fraser do? What would whomever? And you can have it pull from these different kind of schools of thought, and it can be your thinking sparring partner. Another really good way to use it, and I'll get off this tangent in a second, we can go back to the blogs versus not. Another really good way to use it is, and this goes for really anything that like it doesn't have to be fitness specific, but if you're going and you're saying, hey, I want to run this program with this goal, or I need to adjust my training this week because I'm going on vacation, ask it to be an expert in the field you're asking about and tell you what things that you probably don't know to ask. So I'll go on and be like, hey, I'm having this problem. I know that there are questions that I should be asking that I actually have no idea to ask. What are those questions? And then answer them for me. And you could start to like really in that way teach yourself on AI. But that's beyond the point. Yes, so the individual program was really popular. The blog was popular. Individual was popular. Now we're back to the blog. And the central program with blogs, or the problem with blog programming, is that because it is written for a generalized person, we have trouble uh, adjusting it for ourselves and for our own needs. And so that's what we'll get into today.
Cool. Yeah, so you a lot of good history there, a lot of good we're seeing a peek into your brain and how things work and it's chaotic in there, but there's so many good nuggets that we can pull out from there. And then the thing, so let's try and zero in on you as a coach. You're writing this blog program, and where do you start to look at as far as evaluating, we'll just call it total workload across a day, a week, and maybe a month? What kind of metrics are you looking at when it comes to those values to maybe allow your avatar to progress in the terminology you're using?
Yeah, so I was actually going to start with workload. That is where I start with all programs. Fortunately, my specific program, Strong, is an S1D1 program. And what that means is that people start on session one, day one, no matter when they start, right? Because it's sold online. So you go online, and when you sign up for that program, you start on day one, no matter if it's April of 2025 or you sign up next year and it's June of 2026. You're starting on the very first day of programming, which allows me to really manage workload across the life of this program. And for those listening, workload in the most simple terms is how much stuff you're doing each week, right? There's a lot of things that go into it, but generally we're looking at, okay, how much are we squatting? How much are we deadlifting? How much are we pressing? How much are we pulling? All of these different movement patterns. We're saying, what is the total volume of that? What is the total load of it? Because maybe you're doing a ton of volume, but the load is pretty light. That's going to have a very different effect. What we typically do is we start towards the lower end of volume just globally, right? So we might be doing sets of 10 on a back squat, but the volume for the whole week of training is not all that high when you consider accessory work, some conditioning work, and the primary work that you're doing. So when I am looking at programming, I start on the lower end of volume. And then over the weeks, I will increase the volume to a point, and this is how I run a lot of my programs. I'll increase the volume to a point that we're going to sustain. We're not really going to change from that volume for a bit. And then we will manage the load. So we'll change the load that that person is doing, and that load will increase. And we'll kind of undulate, which is just flip back and forth between volume increasing, load increasing, and we'll have times where we build up to a certain amount of workload, right? We're doing a certain amount of stuff, and then we'll back off of that. And I don't mean just a deload week. I mean, we might back off of that workload kind of over a few weeks and then build back up again, because if you said to any reasonable person, could you reasonably increase your work for the rest of your life? It's like across a long enough time horizon, yes, but every single week for the rest of your life, no, you can't, right? Kind of have
Mhm.
to stair step your way up. And so I typically will consider how much of each pattern we're doing, how heavy that pattern is. And then when I'm looking at making increases in that load, I'll look at chronic workload, which is your workload over a 28-day period, versus your acute workload, which is your workload over a 7-day period. This feels like a lot of math and get fancy. You really can vibe this one and like take a look at it and generally be pretty accurate. But if we're talking sciency, we're looking at chronic workload. Say we're at 10 sets of squats every single week. If all of a sudden for 7 days we increase our workload by 20%, we're looking at a potential for more injury risk. We're not necessarily going to get injured, but that is just where we start to creep into that zone where it's like, hey, this might be either overtraining or putting ourselves at risk for injury. And then if we go below 20%, of that chronic, right? So chronic just means our baseline. You can look at this. I think most people get this as your calories. Your maintenance calories are 3,000. You go 20% over, you'd be gaining weight. If you go 20% under, you'd be losing weight. And those are extreme ends, right? That would be a decent amount of calories to be under or over. Workload is the same, right? We have our constant workload that we're generally at. That's chronic. If we're 20% under, we're probably not going to make any progress that week, which doesn't mean that you're regressing yet,
Mhm.
right? You might be 20% under because you need to clear fatigue and need to be ready for the next week of training. It also doesn't work with I touch on this because I've had this conversation with someone. If you go 20% under for a week, say,
Mhm.
going 20%, if you're increasing 20% on the next week, you're back to baseline. So you don't have an acute 20% increase over
Swing.
baseline, which is where we start to maybe get some injury risk. So you have a lot of margin, right? You have 40% room there for change, right? 20% down, 20% up. You have a lot of room for change. And so when I write my program, I try to stay within those parameters. And frankly, it is hard to get over 20% more work unless you do something that is like very clearly more than you've been doing. And so what
Mm,
I mean, it's like if you've been running 10 miles every Saturday and then you turn around and you run 40, like you don't need to be told that that's way more than you've been doing.
right, right, of
It's
course.
clear. But people who follow general programs and also love to train, they go to the gym and their buddy's like, yo, let's do a Metcon. And they're like, yeah, Metcon on top of my training I did. Plus, I'm gonna run a half marathon this weekend. Work can let you know that, hey, you're doing a little too much.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's a cool thing. You talked about this idea of you can vibe your way through that. And I definitely do want to specify there is more to programming than just vibes. It comes with so many years of looking at a session and putting yourself through that session as a coach, as an athlete, and saying, wow, but I know by this fifth exercise, what's my effort level like? What's my technique and my movement pattern like? And I think that's something that's really hard to measure as a coach, even on video feedback, right? You've been an individual coach and a blog coach. You've been part of video review for a long time. And there can be so much value in video review in Olympic lifting and gymnastics, in all of these complex, even very simple movements. And so, where do you see that value being able to do it a little bit more yourself? We talked about the coach still being invaluable, but being able to correlate a drop in power or a change in bar path that we see after the session rather than posting it, seeing a review 3 or 4 days later and getting that slower feedback loop.
Yeah. So first, I want to say that video review online for technique work, super solid, right? Because it doesn't need to be an immediate feedback loop. Video review for managing fatigue or selecting weights, not great online because it needs to be an immediate feedback loop. Having a coach review you in person and give you that feedback on maybe selecting load, still imperfect because they're not the ones doing it, right? So we can kind of see that maybe bar speed changed. We can think it, right? We can say, like, I've been doing this long enough that I've noticed a difference. Having an actual device like WurQ be able to tell you exactly what's happening is a quick enough feedback loop that we can actually affect some legitimate change based on that. And an example of this might be, I'm sure everyone who has ever done a squat cycle has and filmed some of their lifts has done a lift and been like, oh my God, that was the slowest squat I've ever done. And then you watch it and you're like, it actually looked like every other squat, right? So like you physically felt off, but the bar speed, at least visually, didn't change. WurQ can tell you, hey, your bar speed didn't change. So like
Mhm.
you might feel more fatigue at the moment, but you're actually firing okay, which then means you could do another set, right?
Yeah.
But if you came off that set and you're like, well, I feel like I slowed down a lot. And then you looked at your work and your work is like, yes, you're 10% slower on that lift, which would be a lot of percent. But just for the sake of this example, you were 10% slower on that lift, you would maybe make the decision to terminate your work on those back squats or change the load or something so that you could preserve the speed, which touches on the topic that bar speed is really important, but that's not what we're getting into. The WurQ gives you that feedback immediately, or it can show where you're changing speeds in a movement, right? You might be that force curve on that movement might look out of whack, right? Like ideally, we're standing up from a squat, we're getting faster as we
Mhm.
get closer to the top. And if that's not the case, we've got some things to look into. And having actual biometric feedback allows you to get those insights
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's a really interesting way to put it because I've been programming sets for some of the things that I write are these sets ranges. I don't know how often you use three
all the
to
time.
four, 5 to 6 sets. And when you're an athlete, as anyone who follows a decent program is, you have to make a decision to yourself when you get to the end of the lower end of that range and you begin to say, am I ready to go to the upper end of that range. And a lot of the time it might be emotions, it might be considering something else like your sleep last night, your nutrition. There could be a lot of things playing in your ability to add that extra work on and push into that. If you did the extra set in every time you programmed the set range, you're looking a little bit closer to that 20% increase in total volume. So understanding if we have a subjective metric that said, hey, if you are 10% slower in your set five at any time, do not push to set six. It's super easy to do something like that in, let's say, running intervals. You're doing 400 meters and all of a sudden you're 10 seconds slower in a 400-meter run. That's a significant drop off if we wanted to do every 400-meter run. But in a back squat, say, it is very different if you did 5 reps at a certain bar speed and then you're later on you do 5 reps at another bar speed. Just because you completed it doesn't mean you showed that you've earned that fifth set. I think it's people go too close to I failed, I didn't fail. Whereas you often don't arrive at an injury when you fail a rep. You arrive at an injury
Right.
when you push yourself through a rep that was one you shouldn't have done. I think I've heard that so many times. Oh, I shouldn't have done that one, or something like that.
Totally. And not to mention that when people see a range, they automatically think 5 sets is better than 3 sets, right? Just
Yeah.
more is better,
Yeah.
and don't understand the function of a range, which is exactly that, right? It's to say, hey, I don't know if 3 sets or 5 sets is going to be appropriate for you today. We're going to find out.
Mhm. Beautiful. So let's dive into a little bit on the CrossFit side of things. So we spoke a bit about sets and reps and measuring bar speed as a way to understand how our session is going. I want to transition a little bit more into some conditioning or maybe some Metcon type workouts. So when we program or we write CrossFit or Metcon style workouts for a general population, oftentimes we have very few true metrics to measure about that workout, except for the result or how we did. You referenced smoking me in a burpee workout by a couple seconds earlier in our conversation. But oftentimes, different athletes can arrive at a very similar score very differently. And so, as a coach, as someone who writes workouts, what are you looking at, and how would you coach someone, or how would you coach someone differently, maybe when it comes to the same workout?
For sure. I mean, let's set the stage a little bit. I'm 5'7",
Mhm.
and Trevor's what, 6'2", 3?
Yeah, two.
Yeah. Trevor's 6'2". Trevor's also got kind of long limbs on top of actually being tall, right? There's guys who like kind of move like a shorter guy, even though they're taller. Trevor's a tall dude. I actually have long limbs for my height. I have a really short torso. But that doesn't really matter for this example. We might do a workout that's got wall balls and burpee box jump overs in it. We have done this workout, like heavy wall balls and burpee box jump overs. And if I'm coaching the two of us, I'm looking at us going, all right, Trevor is going to have relatively low effort on those wall balls because he's going to not have to throw it that high. Yes, it's going to be taxing on the legs. Yes, he has a little bit further to travel, but at that level, at that speed, what's difficult about the wall ball is that kind of like last little bit where I am maybe having to jump a bit at the end because this was a heavy wall ball to get it up there. I'm going to have to put a lot of effort into those wall balls. So I might consider breaking them up. If I'm coaching Trevor, I might say, dude, don't break them up. Like, just go at a really steady pace, stay nice and casual. And then on the burpees, we're going to do a strategy where you're going fast for 5, slow for 5. Or we might
Mhm.
say, hey, Trevor, actually, these wall balls are so easy for you, but those burpees are going to be really hard for you. You have further to travel. You're heavier than Jake. He's going to be able to do them faster at pretty much any level of fatigue that you both reach. He's going to be faster just baseline, and therefore going to be faster when he decides to go faster or you get tired. So let's maybe have Trevor, you break up the wall balls so that you have more energy for the burpees,
Mhm.
right? And Jake, maybe you go unbroken on the wall balls and do them fast, like put a ton of effort into them because your kind of baseline pace on the burpees is going to be a bit faster than Trevor's. So he's going to just kind of go at his pace that he's like gaming for. And you're going to be able to go. Me, I'll be able to go. And then if we're talking about like real performance, I would say, hey, Jake, if you do that at the end, you're always going to be able to sprint faster than Trevor on a burpee, no matter what, because you're just smaller. Like it like literally takes you less time to do it. And so setting the stage for that, we know that just kind of because we've done it so often,
Yeah.
right? What work allows you to actually do is look into the data and confirm whether or not that's correct, right? Like we may think that because that's generally what happens with tall versus short athletes, with light versus heavy athletes, but we may get the work data back and go, actually, you know what? Like Trevor struggled more on the wall balls than Jake did, and Jake maybe was faster on the burpees, but they were taking a significant more amount of effort than they were taking Trevor. And you can build a pacing strategy based on that data that you get back. And
Hmm.
so the second athlete in this example really doesn't matter if you're using a work on yourself, right? If you're using it to kind of coach yourself, because what you end up doing is getting enough data from work that tells you how to pace for a workout. And so
Right.
let's do a different example. Say it's power cleans, chest to bar, and rowing. And now you've been using work for 6 months. You've got all sorts of data on how difficult rowing is or isn't for you. Same with power cleans, same with chest to bar. You can look at that workout, come up with a strategy and a way to approach each of those movements that maximizes your ability to execute on your most difficult movement. So say that happens to be the chest to bar. Your work says, hey, you end up working really hard and spending a lot of energy on the chest to bar whenever you do them. So maybe it won't tell you this, but you'll be able to gauge this. Maybe you change how you row and how you do these power cleans so that you have more energy for your chest bar. Being able to have that sort of data is something completely new for us. We've not had that ever before, right? The ability to look at movement specifics and see what those movements do to our heart rate, to our power, to all of these things, and then be able to inform our training and our strategy based on it. Even if you're a recreational athlete, right? Like the better you can train, the better results you're going to have. Is something completely new and a really interesting thing that we're going to get to play with.
Yeah, I like that. The old adage in a lot of training used to be you would train, you would get an idea of what you're capable of, and then you would have to spend time training understanding where your limits are, right? Like, so you would be going into a competition season, and we spend a multitude of weeks just figuring out where our paces and abilities lie, where it really came down to, hey, I'm going to try sets of 10 on this workout, and then I'm going to do a similar workout, and I'm going to try sets of 3 or 5 and see how those things compare. And we just had to go based on subjectivity, based on maybe the time you got inside of a workout and doing things, just like you mentioned in the wall ball example. Someone who's like me, who's a bigger athlete, who maybe excels at the bigger athlete movements, external loads, things like that, they would think, oh, I got to push really hard on the exercise I'm good at because I'm not good at this exercise. Where when you allow those metrics and those different statistics to come in and say, well, if you can keep your heart rate lower here, you can afford to push your heart rate higher over here and increase your speed because you're if you do 10% faster on one burpee box jump over, that's a 5 seconds per rep movement versus the 10% faster on a wall ball, which is already a 2 to 3 seconds per rep movement. That over the course of we know wall balls and burpee box jumps can be in workouts with hundreds of reps. This can make minutes of difference, right? So I think that's super pertinent and allows those metrics to be visible to all. Now we're talking about two people who are really interested in pushing it and into the sport. How does someone maybe in a day-to-day class sense, or someone who is an athlete who loves metcons and these exciting adrenaline type workouts, how would they use these metrics in order to maybe get more out of their day-to-day fitness?
Yeah, I mean, you've got two things there with somebody who's just an enthusiast, we'll call them, where you're not necessarily looking to compete. You just love doing this stuff. One is performance, which we just touched on and is pretty obvious on how to use performance or how to use this to increase your performance and inform your pacing. The other one that I think is really interesting and is how I would coach somebody if they were a class member and I know that they use WurQ as their kind of their tracking device is the mindset game because you have people in
Mm,
class all the time who are like, I'm so bad at deadlifts, or I'm so bad at whatever, or like insert any complaint you hear in the CrossFit gym or whatever gym you're going to all the time. Or like, and not or, but when people are complaining about that stuff, they often think that they're bad at it, right? And they don't actually know. They just kind of have this subjective idea that I've had a bad experience with burpees and so I hate them, or they're a hard movement, so I hate
mm,
them, right? What WurQ can do, and this is for the coach, but also for the individual, is like you can have actual data to say how bad or not you are at something, right? And like there are times, especially, I'm sure I know you've seen this, Trevor, when you have an athlete who's like, come to the gym, come to the gym. They have this thing that they were initially really bad at. They've made massive improvement. They're still not better than the curve at it. So they think that they're still shit. Then you look at it on WurQ and you're like, no, no, you were this bad. Now you're this bad. And like that delta's really big. Like you've improved a ton. You may not be ahead of the curve or as good as everybody else, but like this is a really useful tool to say, hey, this is not just me like hyping you up as a coach. You've genuinely gotten better at this, and here is the data to support it. That's how I
yeah.
would use WurQ for somebody who's just an enthusiast.
I love that. I think I've always tried to break it down to percentages to get people to relatively understand where they're at. And a lot of the time, the focus does go on the leaderboard, right? Jumping into this leaderboard and saying, well, I'm fifth on the leaderboard, but really the distance from fifth to first in certain workouts could be a very small percentage. And so, something that me and Dimitri got on in our conversation previously was this idea of adding other metrics to a leaderboard, right? So, talking about power you generate throughout a workout. Because if you have someone who's Jake's size versus my size, and we both do 100 wall balls, Jake creates more power in order to accomplish every wall ball, and I create less power. So, if we each get the same time on that workout, there's a scenario in which you say Jake performed better on this workout because of the power metric. Would you ever think it would be, we've talked, me, this is some concept, Dimitri, we're talking about in a class setting, to have everyone's time for the workout also listed with their power throughout the workout? Because with WurQ, we can create a metric of the amount of power you put out across the course of a wall ball and burpee workout. Do you think that's something that you could essentially rank people by instead of just a time?
100%. I will say that I'm a bit of a there are no weight classes in the jungle purist in that
Yeah,
way
yeah,
when it
yeah.
comes to actual leaderboards. That said, there's massive amount of value in that for classes and gyms, right? It's sticky, it's interesting, it's a fun metric to be able to track for people. It's something that you can rally behind, and you can have guys like me be like, yes, I actually did better than you on that workout. And then vice versa, right? Like somebody can, they can go both ways on that metric. I think it's a fun thing to do. But I mostly think it's a fun thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's really fun when you have something like an Orange Theory where you have some one person who is technically doing better than you in their workout because their heart rate monitor metrics are higher than yours. You have everything from that kind of measurement, which is so individual specific, yet it's still measured person to person. And then you have the most egalitarian metric. There's no weight classes in the jungle of it don't matter if you're 6'2", 200 plus pounds. You got to carry this weight and you got to do these burpees. And if you're last, then you're eaten by the whatever's eating you in the jungle, right? So
Yeah.
I love that side of it, and I think that's a great idea. Kind of a closing thought. Where do you see an application for these metrics in the future? Maybe it's a fun, you talked AI, you talked ChatGPT, you talked having a conversation, but let's talk more physical metrics that we could use. Where do you see something like a work strap um, in use in the future that might not be in use right now?
I think that you could use it. So this is a bit of a story. I'll shorten it, but a few years ago at HWPO, we had a number of our athletes. We had almost 10 people come and train at the facility that we have in Vermont for the whole summer. And what happened was people, but no matter kind of what the coaches said, unless we like really, really fought with them, they were doing every session that everybody else was. And this is a range of athletes. I mean, we've got like a 24, we had like a 19-year-old athlete all the way to a 35-year-old athlete. And they're all doing each other's sessions, male, female, 200 plus pounds, 140 pounds, like literally every sort of kind of avatar you could imagine, all doing kind of equal amounts of volume, save for a bit of different things. I think that a really interesting application for us that have training camps would be to have everybody using the WurQ and be able to use that data to inform these athletes, right? Like, because we kind of know as coaches, hey, you shouldn't do this session, but it'd be even better to have some concrete data on that and also be able to show the athlete that data and say, hey, no, like, this is not a feelings thing. This is not a like, I'm trying to hold you back. This is like legitimately you are doing worse. And if we do more of this, you're going to do more worser. So don't
Love
do
it.
it, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to get them into that. And so I think that's an interesting application. I could see it being used similarly for sports teams. And then I think that down line, if you got total adoption in a gym, everybody was on a work strap, the coach who's writing the programming for that gym could make a much more effective group program with legitimate data.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Something that popped into my head was an old quote by Rich Froning. In training, you listen to your body, and in competition, you tell your body to shut up. Um, you would think that the best athletes have the best inner dialogue and they're most in tune with their deepest training feelings, but they have for someone who's experienced it more with these athletes, they are the best at shoving those feelings down and then adapting to the stimulus they put on themselves. But I think whether you're a person in the gym or a person who's training professionally in these avenues, one of the hardest things to deal with is injury. And if we can have something that can give us a red light, a big stoplight that says like you are on a hot route to not being able to do this thing you love doing, I think that that is an application that is priceless in my mind.
I agree. This is not my quote. I don't know where I heard it. I'm going to apologize in advance for anybody that it might offend. I don't mean it in an offensive way, but they were saying that good athletes either have to be dumb enough to not care, or they have to be smart enough to know what not to care about,
Mm,
right?
I love
And
that. Yeah.
without data, that's true. But if we have data, actual data that is as in depth as WurQ is, I think it democratizes that polarization and allows everybody to look at something and say, because the essence of that quote is the idea that like you either have to be so smart that you can say, okay, like this feeling matters, this feeling doesn't matter. Like this is an ache, this is an injury, right? Or you have to be dumb enough that you're like, I'm just gonna do, and I'm 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 gonna listen to whomever says don't do, right? Like you're just a robot that's being turned on and off. And so both ends of that spectrum are achieving the same outcome through different means. And in the middle is where it gets tough, right? Somebody's like smart enough to overthink it. But now, if you have all sorts of data, everybody can look and make decisions that are concrete and informed and are not based on subjective feelings.
Beautiful. I love that. I think that's a great way to kind of bring this conversation to a close.